In this video, I want to point out why there's a certain thing with psychedelics that caused me to be very confused about its implications. And it's something that has to do with the visual imagery. And I just wanted to figure out why exactly the actual visions that we see, they could be anything pretty much, but the way that it presents itself is something that is highly aesthetic. And the definition of aesthetic is having to do with beauty and complexity and form, the study of something that is beautiful. So it seems very bizarre to me that most of the visions, specifically with DMT, they involve a lot of motifs and archetypes and something that is described as complex geometry. So it's often mixing a lot of ancient Egyptian / carnival-esque looking things but on top of geometry and complexity. And a lot of the time these things are very good at developing flow. So often when you think of artwork and you want to make good artwork, you're always thinking about how can I make this artwork flow together properly in a way that catches the eye and doesn't cause any sort of blocks or dead ends where you say this doesn't really flow into that and this shouldn't go there. For some reason, the psychedelic images have a almost mastery or a complete mastery over this flow phenomenon or this flow aspect of art where everything flows perfectly and everything feels like it fits together flawlessly. And this is something that has always been very bizarre to me because I've always tried to point it out to people who can't really give me much of an explanation on why it chooses to be highly aesthetic and beautiful looking as opposed to wonky and basic and not very aesthetic and beautiful on the eyes. I feel like everything that I see in the DMT flash, for instance, is something that is very complicated beauty. I remember Terence McKenna saying that these psychedelic trips are basically showing you countless imagery that is more aesthetic and beautiful than the 1,000 years of Renaissance art that we've built over the years. And it seems bizarre to me that dreams, for instance, they might be able to show us images of things that look real in terms of seeing people or seeing sceneries. And I guess some people could call that beautiful, but it doesn't really show you complex imagery that is abstract and out of the norm, but still in a way that it's actually very, very aesthetic and beautiful and easy on the eyes or attractive on the eyes. There seems to be this disconnect. So it's obviously easy to see how psychedelics have inspired a bunch of art and the whole psychedelic visionary art movement. I think that the main components of this art movement would be first Alex Grey as the beginning guy, and I would say Salvia Droid, Android Jones, and another guy which I believe is one of the greatest. His art name is Eloah Projects. It's ELOH Projects, and his name is Sean, but he's incredible. He's someone that I really truly admire, and I want to make art that is even a fraction as good as his. But he's just a unbelievable god at it. But all of these people are specifically creating art that is inspired by these psychedelic visions. And it's interesting that dreams also inspire people to have artwork as well. But there's something very, very identical to the artwork that is being produced by psychedelic artists, and enough to a point where I'm able to actually pick out why they're drawing what they're drawing in certain circumstances, especially with an artist such as Acid Flow, which I shared in a previous video. And it's I just find it fascinating that these people are able to actually produce something that is very reminiscent of these experiences and actually do it justice in terms of what is actually being shown. And obviously what we can sort of deduce from these artworks is that it's actually very aesthetic and beautiful and flows together perfectly. And I know that it has to do with their artistic eye to be able to recreate these things, but most of the inspiration comes from the actual experience. And part of the actual experience is that it's incredibly complex and incredibly designed in a way that is just so masterful. And it often feels like we shouldn't take credit for the visions that we're having, because it seems unbelievable that our own minds are creating such complexity and such aesthetic and beauty when we can't, or most of us can't really produce it on our own. As an artist myself, I've been trying to recreate my visions, but I still feel like I don't do it much justice at all. I feel like my attempts are pretty sophomorish and not really worthy of any note. I'm trying to get better at it, but as I've said before, it takes a lot of time, and often I spend a lot of my time trying to balance other crafts and trying to develop them all at once. I believe that if I just focused on one craft, I'd be much further along, but I just can't drop two of them and only focus on one. That's just not who I am. So I've just been trying to put more effort into the time that I'm spending throughout the day and trying to devote more time to actually improving my art and hopefully getting closer to the visions that I experience. But still, no one has been able to accurately answer why these visions are so beautiful and why they're so aesthetic and flow so flawlessly. We've had a lot of materialist and reductionist ideas on why we might see specific motifs and patterns like checkerboard patterns, but we don't really have any explanation on why it is arranging itself into the forms that it is, and why those forms are beautiful instead of wonky and not very coherent. It doesn't add up for me. So I would be interested in any ideas on what you guys think on why these things look the way they do, because they could have looked anyway, but they look really good, and that's just something really bizarre that I haven't been able to put my finger on. So I hope you guys think that this is something worth trying to think about. For me, it's always been a question on my mind that's very important. So hopefully you guys can process that too, and maybe you guys can come up with something. So I will see you in the next video.